good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you are joining from around the world. I am Krishan Wright. I am the founder of Blaxit Global and the host of the Blaxit Global podcast. I am so excited that you are joining today because we have the one and only Chef Karen Ricks, who is joining us all the way from Albania to talk about world schooling, raising a child abroad, and nomadic life. So, for those of you who are interested in moving abroad with kids, curious about world schooling, this is the live for you. So, yeah, we are so delighted that you're here. And yeah, please, Karen, share with us a little bit of your story. Like, give us a little taste of who you are.
Thank you so much for having me here today, Krishan. It is an honor and a pleasure. I'm always excited to talk about world travel as a family and education, cooking, world schooling, and all of that is a part of who I am and what I love doing. As you said, my name is Karen Ricks. I'm the head chef of our kitchen classroom. And I usually introduce myself as a Christian wife, a world schooling mom, and a nomadic chef. I have been a professional educator for 25 years now. Wow, that is just, it seems just insane. It's been so long. But I grew up as a Montessori child and transitioned into public school in San Diego, California. I was born and raised. And I love so much about the things that I learned as a child and the things that I got to see and do, and that wonderful, glorious Southern California climate. I didn't appreciate it truly until I moved away at 18, went to school in New York, which is where I met and eventually married my husband. And back in 2007, after teaching in a variety of places all over the United States, we picked up and moved to Japan, which was a really exciting adventure. It was supposed to be temporary, 1 year, maybe two, if we really liked it. But that 1 year turned into 10. And our son was born in central Japan, where we lived during that decade. I founded my own international Montessori school, and we were having an absolute blast just living and working and enjoying our community there. And then 2016, I got the absolutely unbelievable offer of a lifetime to attend this amazing cooking school in Italy. So we sold it all, picked up, and moved to Italy from Japan. And that was an amazing adventure that still informs my teaching and my cooking to this day. But while we were in Italy, where we thought we might stay for a few years, we had an unbelievable offer in the UK and then another in Mexico. And as we every time we picked up and moved to a new place, we realized, we could kind of keep doing this indefinitely. And here we are, almost 5 years later, still picking up and kind of traveling where the wind carries us, as it were. And that's really how we've kind of fallen into this amazing nomadic world schooling lifestyle that we lead today.
Oh, wow, that is fantastic. There's so much there that I want to unpack. I know for me, and I also want to acknowledge all of our lovely people that have joined. I was hearing a little bit of scratchy audio. I don't know if it's on my side. And so if those of you who are watching, if the audio sounds a little off, please let us know, because I'm hearing it, but I'm not sure if it's an issue on my end or your end. So please let me know if there was any scratchiness there or any dropout. That would be really helpful. But in the meantime, I want to acknowledge some people that Okay, they're saying, Karen, your audio is off. So it's breaking up on your end, they're saying. So maybe I'll pop you out and give you a second to fix your audio, or maybe take your headset off. And in the meantime, I'll acknowledge the rest of our group here. Hey, so while Karen is working out her audio, I'm just gonna, so thank you for letting me know. I was hearing it on my end, but sometimes it's like, is it me? Because Hurricane Henri is supposed to be coming, or is it our guest that's in Albania? Look, it's live, y'all. Things happen, so it's good. I'm glad it's interactive. So yes, I want to say hello. We have Lori here, Tendai, Journey with Nurse Marie. She's joining us from Cali. I'm going to pop you guys up there. Lori, lovely picture. We've got Tendai. Yes, good morning from LA. Yes, hello. Yay, Journey with Nurse T Marie. Good day from Cali. Yes, yes. Oh my goodness, so glad you are here. Dee Walker. Hello, Dee. How are you? Hello, and Shania, how are you? Yes, we are fixing that audio and waiting for Karen to give me a thumbs up, which I think we're getting. So Karen, if you can hear me and you're good, thumbs up. All right, we are back.
Let's see if this is a little better. I lost the headset.
There we go. So you guys, let us know if this sounds better. So what it do? I'm just saying hello to some people. We're saying hello to what it do, DG. Hey, hey.
I saw Lord on there.
Yes, yes.
Tanai, who popped up.
Oh,
question in another group.
Yes. Hello, hello. Yeah, and I know some of you have let us know where you're joining us from. So, if you haven't, take a time, let us know where you're joining from. And yeah, like I said, our lovely guest, Karen Ricks, is joining all the way from Albania. So now that we've worked out our technology, I want to back into her incredible story. And since the connection was a little off, why don't we, Lori's saying it sounds much better now. So why don't we play that little bit back again? Because I know you talked about making that leap and a job of opportunity. So I don't want anyone to miss anything that you had to say. So go for it.
Well, I love that you use that word leap, Krishan, because we say that all the time. We made a really huge leap of faith, my husband and I, leaving the United States in our normal life to pick up and move to Japan back in 2007. And that was a huge leap. But since then, it's like every other leap doesn't seem quite so big. After we sold it all in Japan and picked up and moved to Italy, so many of our Japanese friends were like, oh my goodness, isn't that scary? I thought you didn't know or speak Italian. But having already made the leap from the United States to Japan, learning a new language with 3 new syllabary, not just like one kind of different alphabet, but 3, 2 that are phonetic and 1 that is pictographic. The move from Japan to Italy seemed more like just a big step, not necessarily a leap. And then we transitioned from Italy to the UK for another incredible opportunity that opened up. And that was almost like kind of taking a step down and relaxing and breathing and getting comfortable with moving around the world. And then jumping over to Mexico, making the leap across an ocean and back to North America was almost like coming home, having grown up in Southern California and traveling back and forth to Mexico as a child. So each and every time we pick up and we make the leap to go to a new to us city or country on a new to us continent, every step of the way is a really exciting adventure. And it has been an amazing journey.
Yes, I mean, there's some big, bold moves that have taken you from where you were in the States all the way to Japan. And like you said, learning, and I'm so impressed. Like that is a very, I think any of the languages that are more character based and not, in the whole alphanumeric system, it makes it a little challenging because I'm sure there's so many different characters, similar characters, but different meanings, right? And so just being able to train your brain to recognize it, understand what the interpretation is, I am in awe. And then to have you all, decide to give birth abroad in Japan and then make that move to Italy and then the UK, and you've settled into Albania. So let's pick the story up when you had your son. And so I know when you were in Japan, you and your husband created a Montessori school. And so was that the reason, or maybe was that like the impetus for exploring having your child grow up either in the Montessori teaching and then world schooling? Like, let's start there.
Okay, actually, it was the other way around. I have been a Montessori teacher, as I said, for almost 25 years. But I had been teaching in different Montessori schools and settings in the United States before we moved to Japan. And I was actually planning to just kind of take the year off and be a housewife and a tourist while we were in Japan, and then go back to my Montessori school where I'd been teaching in the States. And when that didn't happen, as we extended our time and continued to extend our time in Japan, the plans to expand our family that we had temporarily put on hold in the United States when we decided to go to Japan picked up again. And we realized not only were we actually living our normal lives now in Japan, but we had made so many wonderful friends that became as close as family. And we had a really tight-knit community and support that we had built up there. And so, as strange as it might seem, it made sense for us to really lean on that support system, on those friends who stepped up to help us as we went to expand our family. And we really could not have done it on our own. As much as I am appreciative of my language skills, at the time, they were still in their infancy. And so I had wonderful friends who went to doctor's appointments with me early on, and a really close friend who served as a midwife for me when I first went into labor, and so many of the amazing doctors and nurses and staff at the hospital who were family members of people that my husband and I had both been teaching over the years, all stepped up to provide the support that we needed to welcome our son into the world. And that was an amazing and incredible experience. And had it not been for that, I don't think that we would have had the confidence to continue to lean on that support system again when we opened the doors to our Montessori school just a few months later.
Wow, that is incredible, because a lot of people, when they think about their entrepreneurial journey, if they have a business in the States or they're embarking on a journey abroad and thinking, okay, I have this career in the States and, what are my skills that are transferable, perhaps? You and your husband put them all together and created a school in Japan, a Montessori school, leveraging, your talents, your skills. So I want to level set a little bit, because as I was researching for this conversation, and, you read about opportunities, right, for kids to grow and learn abroad. There's the traditional setting, there's international schools, which many people might be familiar with or have their children in. There's Montessori education, as you discussed, and then there's world schooling. And then it's interesting to me, as I was researching, you have different names for it, right? It could be experiential learning, world schooling, unschooling, homeschooling, which probably is people most familiar with. So in your words, what is world schooling?
Well, I am so glad that you asked, Krishan, because world schooling can look so many different ways depending on who it is you're talking to and where in their journey they are. And so for us, world schooling is learning from everyone we meet, everywhere we go, and every activity in which we participate. We like to say as world schoolers that the whole world is our classroom. And I like to remind parents who ask me about this educational journey that we don't say that we world school our child or that we're educating our child. This really and truly is a family educational journey because we are all learning new things about ourselves and each other and the world around us every single day.
That's awesome. So it's interesting. So when I was thinking about world schooling, and I've grown up in the States as you did, and I went to public school. I also went to Catholic school. I went to college and got my bachelor's and my master's. And I did very well in school, not always, but I did well in school. And I have two children, as many people know that listen to the podcast or in the group. And it's interesting to me. I grew up I'm from the Bronx, from the boogie down. Boop, boop. And so when I look, though, at the opportunities that my children have, a lot of it are things that I wasn't able to enjoy as a child. But when it comes to their education, I do see that I was at an advantage that they didn't have. And I see that in the way our system of learning in the States has evolved to teach for the test, kind of like memorization, rote information, taking it in and playing it back, but not applied education, development of critical thinking skills. And so for me, what I loved about what I was learning about world schooling, and especially as I had those experiences abroad in different countries and being able to see the different ways in which children learn, it really was, it made me take a second look at their education, that, they go to these, great suburban schools. But, I had music education when I was in school. Like, we had real instruments, not the recorder. I played at Carnegie Hall when I was 12 years old. I played.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, something I don't talk about very often. But like, I had different, and this is in the Bronx, right? I had different opportunities. And like I said, when I fast forward decades ahead, it feels like our kids that are at a greater disadvantage, particularly when you layer on all the things that they're dealing with. They're dealing with the whole transition in terms of their development, just in getting used to their bodies and being around other kids. They're also dealing with social media, which we didn't have to deal with, and all of the addiction that comes along with that, and the false expectations, I think, that everyone grapples with, but definitely different when you don't have a resource of skills and tools, right? And then, unfortunately, in the United States, we have a huge problem with the proliferation of guns. And so school violence, gun violence, and all of those things that kids have had to deal with. And that's the expectation that we as adults are placing in their hands. It's a difficult challenge. And then, not done, later on the global pandemic, right? And so as these kids are transitioning, at least in the States, we're having this conversation in August, and some schools have gone back in. I know in the South, they go a little earlier than those of us that are in the North. It's interesting for me to think, like, there's just so much there that our kids are carrying, and how liberating it is to be an active participant in your education versus
Yes.
this whole other system that a lot of us have been conditioned to accept as it just is. So, yeah, that's really what is just lighting me up about this conversation.
You highlighted so many of the different challenges that our children face today in traditional schools, whether public or private, Montessori or Catholic, in a big city or in a rural area. There's so much going on in that sphere right now. And in the last year and a half, the whole world has shifted and everything went sideways. And it has given everyone an opportunity to look at not just schooling, but our everyday living and working and communicating with people in an entirely different way. And that's why I get really excited, especially now, about sharing our nomadic world schooling journey with more and more parents, because we have this opportunity now with this different perspective to take another look at all the things that we used to think we have to do a certain way, and really ask ourselves, not only is this necessary, but is this helpful? Is this the best possible way to do things for our family, for my child in this particular situation at this point in our lives? And this is something that may need to be reevaluated again in another 6 months or a year or 5 years or 10 years. But the point is, the whole world has changed, and it's important for us to take a look at not only how we think about educating our children, but how we live our day-to-day lives. And with this world schooling journey that we are on right now, for us, there is no differentiation. It's not, this is school time, this is work time, this is playtime. This is the way we live our lives. And in a lot of our unschooling groups, that's what we like to talk about as a truly freely unschooling lifestyle. It's living as if school did not exist. And that doesn't mean that you don't learn anything. We all know that that we have new things to learn each and every day with every interaction that we have with people. This is just a different way to look at that. And if you really take the time to ask yourself, does that have to happen inside a brick and mortar building? Does it have to happen in segregated peer groups? Does it have to happen between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m.? Does it have to happen in person? And so many of these questions that have come up, the answers a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago would have been completely different from our lived experiences now. And that's why I continue parents to question all those things that you thought you knew, all those things that you thought had to be a certain way, and really and truly ask yourself, does it? Because quite often the answer is, well, not if I don't want it to.
Exactly. And that's the whole thing is, when I was writing a description for our conversation today, I really centered on, as you make a decision to leave the country that you're a citizen in, your home country, and make that move abroad, it really is a process of unlearning, and to afford yourself and your child, right? So for an adult, they're unlearning and challenging their beliefs. But for a child, this is such a great opportunity so that they don't have to then turn up into an adult and then question like all of the journey steps along the way, right? They can go and grow as empowered individuals that are intentional and invested in learning about another culture, being able to have that applied learning and experiential learning. And to your point, it's not during these hours where, you're saying this is what you have to learn. It's taking anything and turning it into an opportunity to grow and to learn. And I loved what you said, like about making the world your classroom. So I want to definitely get to some of these questions that have come in. And I know we had some early on. This was from Chica Kip. I'll read. Hey, I have an adolescent with cognitive delays. He doesn't understand nor is he interested in many gen ed activities. Do you have advice on how to world school a child with special needs? Great question.
That is a fantastic question. And I'm going to revert to some of my schoolish language for the purposes of explaining this specific example. But I often encourage parents who have children who maybe don't fit into that traditional mold of what a student looks like in a traditional classroom to think about what their IEP, their individualized educational program might look like. Many homeschoolers or parents with young children who have special needs are familiar with these sort of extra customizations. It might be extra help that you get from your city, state, school district that provides for things like occupational therapy or special assistance within the classroom setting or tutoring outside of the school setting. And world schooling for us has really been the opportunity for the most personalized, customized educational program that anyone could possibly develop anywhere, because it's all built around our child. It is the most child-centered, the most learner-led, the perfect customization by the adults who know and respect the child the most. So you couldn't ask for anything more personalized, more perfect especially for a child who is not interested in whatever might be offered in a traditional classroom setting. I think one of the biggest drawbacks for those who may not fall into the neurotypical mold is that there isn't often an option to say no, to opt out, to say, no, thank you, that's not what I'm interested in a traditional school setting. But when you're world schooling, when you're customizing your own education, you can follow those interests. And then there's no need, as parents often ask me, to, how do I motivate my child? How do I encourage them to learn? Or how do I get them to do this or that or the other thing? When that motivation comes from within, when it's truly intrinsic, you can't stop the learning. That curve is exponentially steep.
Absolutely. And what I love about it is it allows you to learn and go at your own pace, at the child's pace. And so if there's a subject or something that I would imagine that they're having a little bit more difficulty, understanding and embracing, you can think of how to introduce the concept in different ways at the pace that the child learns best. Because as you mentioned, we learn in different ways. I'm a visual learner. I learn best by seeing and then doing. Yes. And it took me years to understand that and embrace that. And also just my personality differences. I'm very, well, some of you know that are in the Blaxit Global Facebook group, I'm extremely introverted. And so it's like, just being able to play to your strengths and know, like, okay, I can learn this, but it has to be presented in this way. You get that level of agency by experience when you're an adult, but when you're a child, that might look very different. And so I think for me, as I listen to you and your experience, world schooling really does put it in the child's hands. And whether they have cognitive delays or you mentioned before, not neurotypical, there's a way to, your child, right? Better than a teacher, anyone else in their life. So being able to take your cues from them, whether it's, visual cues, maybe it's auditory, whatever it is, to present things in a way in which they learn, right? So it's not just saying, hey, sit down here and I'm teaching it to you. It may be kind of introducing these concepts in just different ways so that people don't, the child doesn't put up a guard and just say, you know what, I don't want to deal with this right now. It's something that's interesting. It's something that they're curious about.
Yes.
That's the
Yes.
thing that when I was doing this research for our conversation today, I was like, oh my gosh, like I lit up, it's like part of curiosity that comes along with this journey is something that I think is really, really great. So to that end, I think there's another question from Tendai. Do you follow a curriculum? Do you worry about he may not know certain things? We're currently homeschooling, but we're learning along the way on what to do. Wow, great question.
So I always get this question about curriculum when we talk about world schooling. And it's something that I feel is, again, a huge part of the schoolish culture in which most of us as adults were raised. If you went to a traditional school, whether public or private, even if you might have been homeschooled, often there's a series of textbooks or workbooks or a list, a checklist that you're supposed to go down. At this age, in this year in school, you're supposed to know X, Y, Z. And that constant comparing against this really arbitrary list of facts and categories of things is one of the most freeing things for us to step away from as we step outside of the four walls of a school. And I like to share a number of examples in showing just why a curriculum, for example, isn't necessary. When we first moved to Japan, I had listened to a few audio recordings, and so I knew a few basic words and phrases and greetings, but I did not read or write Japanese, and I couldn't carry on a conversation. So everybody told me, okay, well, you gotta go to Japanese classes. You need to get this workbook and you need to sit down in class and you need to do all the homework. And I've always been a good student. So I followed that advice and I sat down with my workbook and I was bored to tears. It was so frustrating because all I wanted to be able to do was, live my normal life, to go to the grocery store and be able to find what I needed without, picking up something that was going to be completely inappropriate or not at all what I expected and totally gross or whatever. And so one day I went to the supermarket with a friend and our teacher from class, because we were all just going the same direction. And we continued the conversation that we had started in class. But suddenly everything was purely practical and it was immediately meaningful. This was, okay, I need yogurt. Is this yogurt? Is this a sour cream? Is this something else that I don't even know? What is this? And when we were picking out these foodstuffs and pointing at the different characters on the containers, then I was like, oh, all those hours of sitting down and repeating the tracings in the workbook, now it makes sense, because this is where I can apply what I've learned in a way that is meaningful and memorable to me right now in this moment. And that was one of those huge kind of light bulb moments for me when I said, I don't have to put myself through the torture of going to this class. If it's going to bore me to death, I can get together with my friends and we can talk about the stuff that's important to me. And shortly after that, that friend and we ended up getting together with another Japanese friend. We formed this international cooking club and we met once a month. We would shop for ingredients. We would teach each other, speaking in our native languages, how to cook a variety of different dishes. And they taught me how to make Japanese food, and I taught them how to make a lot of the American stuff that I grew up with, good old soul food classics, fun stuff I'd been playing with. And I learned so much more. And my conversational Japanese improved like 100-fold when compared to that sitting in the classroom working from the workbook, because it meant something to me. And when I explain something like that to parents, like, the light bulb goes off. It's like, oh, well, yeah, of course, as an adult, you can do that. And I say, no. As a child, as the parent, you can create that environment for your child too. That's world schooling. And that doesn't have to happen, in some foreign country. You can do that in your own house, after school and on weekends if your child is attending a traditional school. I think it's important for me to step back and point out that I had never even heard of that term, world schooling.
Really?
Until shortly before we picked up and moved from Japan to Italy. The terminology was new to me. I think I learned that word in like 2016. But as I look back on my life and my experiences, I was world schooling when I was in my public school in Southern California. I was world schooling as an adult, following my passions and learning the things that I wanted to do on my own timeline when I was, outside of regular school hours or whatever else. As an adult today, I still am world schooling when I go out to shop and I'm asking, my neighbor or the stranger who's standing next to me, what is this? And, what do you use it for? How do you cook with it? Those things I have learned and cultivated a practice of world schooling now that comes as second nature to me. But it is something that we can all learn how to do, to not make an educational opportunity out of what you're doing, but to observe that those opportunities are happening all around you every single day, wherever you are in the world.
Absolutely, because I think for a lot of people, myself included, that grew up in the traditional education system, I'm constantly learning things all the time, as are you. I'm learning things. I watch a lot of documentaries on the weekends. I learn from guests like you, through the podcast and the platform. It's made me, and I shared at the end of season 2 on the Blaxit Global podcast, how much I've altered my original journey steps. And that was because I had discovered this new information and just being able to kind of like put the pieces of the puzzle together in a different way. But I think what you were talking about was being able to apply that knowledge in the moment, reinforced it for you, right? It crystallized what you had learned.
Yes.
And that whole experiential part of it is like, for those that are in like the tech space, being able to have a sandbox environment, like you learn something and you're able to do it and use it in real time. And this way you get to test it out, to get a feel for it to come and say, okay, this is great. Not like, I'm I'm not going to say I'm getting old, because every day is a gift. But,
Amen.
I'm 47 years old. Half the stuff that I learned, I don't remember. Right?
And I think that's an important thing to note when we're talking about a curriculum too, because if somebody else is imposing the things that they think you should learn, you can learn it for a minute. You talked about all that teaching to the test and the hyper focus, high stakes testing has really ramped up since we were, young children in school. And all of that tells us is that these young people have learned how to absorb the necessary information and regurgitate it in this moment for the purposes of this particular test. But that doesn't mean that it's something that they have actually internalized or that they can put to use in their lives outside of this artificial academic construct that is school. And so all the testing in the world, all the prepared curriculum in the world, all of the best intentions of somebody else imposing what they think is important is still completely meaningless if it's not important and considered necessary by the person who's doing the learning. And that's where this pedagogical idea of children as an empty pitcher that we need to fill up with specific things at specific intervals in order for them to be complete, I think we just need to toss that out the window, because our children are already these beautiful, creative, absorbent-minded individuals who are striving to learn and to grow and to achieve this independence that is already within them. They just need to exert it for themselves. And a lot of times, I feel like my work as a parent, as an educator, is not to impede that process, but it's to set the stage for success, to provide a supportive and encouraging environment when failure occurs. Not if, but when, because we all fail as we're going through the process of learning and trying new things. And just being there to be my sons, my children's, my clients' best cheerleaders as they grow and step out beyond the bounds of what they thought was possible into all the new things that they discovered, when they're really free to do it in the way that is most meaningful, that is most memorable for them.
Absolutely, because I think you're able, in, obviously with me being still in the States, that's really my big frame of reference. But when we look at things like the educational disparities, whether it be socioeconomic and neighborhoods like being disadvantaged, not having access to internet, not having access to up-to-date books and things like that, or buildings that are in decline, or teachers that are exhausted. There's so much there. But in my mind, when you're able to shift and take an approach of world schooling, you're able to look at things and have a different lens, have a different understanding. As an adult, like I mentioned earlier, and I call my mom on the weekends, like I'll watch a documentary and I'll find out something that, another atrocity that was done to us as Black people in this world, in this country. And I'm like, why am I just finding this out today at 47 years old? Or why am I not, and then why wasn't I taught this in school? And we're having these discussions, in a bigger context about, critical race theory and all of these other things. But you know what? When you take the education and empower yourself, right, and take control of what goes into your child's mind, and being able to leverage not only your own experience, but those of others, to learn a different language, to learn about a different culture, I feel it breaks down those walls and those barriers. It doesn't create these others. It's saying like, hey, you know what? We're all on this planet for a finite amount of time. We have to figure out how to get along with each other.
Yes.
We haven't always gotten it right.
Yes.
How do we do this? How do we move and learn from our own experiences, the experiences that have happened before us, so that we can shape the experiences of those in the future in a positive way? That to me is the sense of how we move forward as a collective society.
That's right. And when you take a look at that much bigger picture, and when you really and truly think about this process of learning, not as something that we're imposing on or doing to the child for this finite amount of time, but really a lifelong process, then you can see that, the adult that you see walking down the street next to you, you can't tell by looking at them if that person, was doing well or poorly in algebra in 7th grade or in high school, or, if this child was potty trained at 2 or not until they were 8, or, if this person has beautiful cursive writing or they can't print their name to save their life. And all of those things, you realize that's not the important thing. We don't have to constantly compare and contrast. One is not necessarily better or worse. We all have these different levels of knowledge and experience, and that's part of what makes learning from one another, with one another, so exciting and infinitely interesting.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to get back into these comments. So this one is from Lori. What about calculus or organic chem? In other words, what about the things you don't know, but your child may be interested in? Wow, that is a great question.
That is a fantastic question, Lori. And I have the perfect example to explain how this world schooling approach is even more important for those more advanced subjects as well. When I was in high school, I had the opportunity to take some advanced classes, and I was doing things like calculus and physics. And I got really excited because I could participate in this college level course for calculus, in which we were deriving all of these mathematic equations that we were then using in my physics course like a few weeks after the fact. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is great. I'm understanding the math and then I'm applying, and this is making so much sense. And all of this learning is great. And then I got to this university class in which I thought I was applying all this really cool physics stuff that I thought I knew. And it turns out I didn't really have the same grasp or understanding that I thought I did. And then I had the opportunity, outside of the regular school hours, to pursue something else about which I'm passionate, and that is figure skating. And let me tell you, when I picked up these library books, I'm talking about old library books. This was my favorite book that was printed like back in 1948, dealing with body anatomy and the anatomy of tracing figures like figure eights and serpentine patterns on the ice, and fast forwarding and rewinding VHS tapes in the VCR, for those of you, I'm dating myself here, but slow-mo and fast forward and rewinding and watching these professional figure skaters, these amateurs in competition, doing these things that I was trying to learn. Suddenly, all of these new gears started to click. And there wasn't anybody around me where I was who was doing anything to teach figure skating. So this was literally on my own, driven by my own personal passions. And I did eventually move into a space where I could get professional coaching, and I moved up the ranks and became a professional coach myself. But all of that was driven by my personal and intense desire to learn. And because I had already learned how to learn, how to find the necessary resources and take advantage of them when I had the available time, because keep in mind, this is while I was still a full-time university student, I still found a way in a place where nobody was doing what I was doing. And now, I mean, this was more than 20 years ago that I got started on down that path. Our children have access to way more resources online than I did at that point in time. Access to professionals all around the world. It might be like, the online courses like edX or, MIT, or, finding someone who is just really skilled at what they do. Maybe they haven't pursued a professional degree or anything in their field, but they put up a YouTube channel and they're teaching people how to do what they know how to do. Those things are available. All we need is to encourage that innate curiosity that says, I can seek out and find and take advantage of the resources that are out there, and give our children, encourage them in that drive to do it, and step back and give them the space to explore.
And that's great advice. It's like putting your child in the driver's seat. And also, my daughter is learning how to drive, right? So I kind of put it like when, she's behind the wheel, when they had those, I think maybe they still do, those driver training cars, where it's like she has control of the pedals, but then there's, the instructor has a set of pedals, right? Just in case.
Still an emergency brake on the other side.
So it's just like, okay, it's putting your child in the driver's seat of their education. And so maybe you don't have that skill set, but to your point, you can help them or identify the right resources. And even if it's a learning opportunity for the adult as well, to say, hey, you know what, I might not go deep into this area with you, but I at least want to have some level of familiarity, because this way, if they get stuck, they at least have a conduit to kind of help redirect. Versus kind of like taking it on their own. And when you were talking about it, it reminded me of when I was in college. I wanted to be an attorney originally, and I think I might have talked about it in the podcast, but my whole life plan was when I was in the Bronx, a small young child, When I grow up, I'm going to be 26. I'm going to be a corporate lawyer living in New Zealand. New Zealand's been in there a long time.
I know that.
And I went and I got my bachelor's in English. And I went and I took the test for the LSAT and I bombed it. And I was like, oh, and all oh my gosh. And I had taken like Kaplan or whatever it was, Princeton Review at the time. And I looked back on it and the reading comprehension, which was, the easy part. I mean, I was an English major, like my reading comprehension was always great. Loved the LSAT because it didn't have math, which was not my strong suit. So I was just like, oh yeah, I could do this thing. But it was the logical reasoning games, which is a huge portion of the test. I bombed. It was the if-then statements and all of this stuff. So fast forward when it was about 2010 and maybe 2009, I was like in this period of transition in my life. And I was like, I'd been in New York State government for a long time. I worked out a lot as a lobbyist and I had all this experience. And I'm like, I'm writing legislation. I'm doing all this stuff. Like, might as well like take it and give it another go. Never mind. I have 2 children. I was getting ready to get a divorce, like this whole thing. And so I put in the focus time and my fear, right? Because I have fear print now, is the logical reasoning game. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, how am I going to get, I still can't get it. So my aha moment in terms of my learning was through playing Sudoku. I had never played Sudoku, but I was on the train and I was like, oh, right. And I'm playing Sudoku and that's when it clicked.
Yes.
I was like, oh, this is a logical reasoning game. And so I was just playing and playing and playing and playing. And then when I started to prep and I said, I'm not going through a course, I can do this. I rocked that whole thing, but it took, now granted, I didn't like do the whole law school thing. That's okay
though.
But the point is that was from a failure that happened, maybe 10 years prior. A lot of fear print, right? Because now I know this is a source of intimidation, self-doubt, that whole thing. To then being able to flip it on a dime. But what changed was I had a different experience. I had a different way to apply and transfer playing this game to now, oh, this is that game, just in a different set of words and construct. And then I was able to get to the right answer. So I think, all that is between these 2 responses, and Lori says, thank you, that made sense. It's just being able to like flip it on a dime and flip it on its head. And you never know. Now I'm getting this visual of playing like the Rubik's Cube.
Oh,
right?
yes.
It's like, you never know what combination, like you turn this way and twist it on that it's like, oh, wow. Yes. Like I solved it. Like I figured it out.
And that you have that ability and your history, your opportunities, in the past to practice those things have helped to build up that confidence that you can do those things. But one of the things that I like to share with homeschooling parents is that it's important to recognize that home is the first part of that home school, compound word. And letting that schoolish part start to fall by the wayside, or at least, be secondary, really allows you to think about the comfort that you feel, the space that you have to really be yourself at home. And when you really feel at home in yourself, and when you have time, I literally have the space and time outside of that schoolish setting, then you can let go of this idea that the math has to happen in this increment and the reading has to happen in this increment and the logic has to happen in this increment. And then you're open to the free flow of ideas and thought processes and the interconnective nature, like you discovered with that Sudoku, that it can be fun and it might not look like whatever the studying or learning is considered acceptable by that, schoolish mentality with which we were raised. But that doesn't mean that the learning is not happening. That doesn't mean that those neurons aren't firing back and forth in ways that are going to move you beyond what you originally, might have been trying or intending to do. And it gives you the space to explore the possibilities that would have never been allowed to interact in an environment when everything else is so rigid and dictated and has to fall along these specific lines of expectation.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want to get to this follow-up question from Lori. It sounds very doable for a young child, but what about an older child? And I think I'll tack a little bit onto that. So for an older child, right? So my daughter is a teenager. She's about to start her the 11th grade. We're staying until she finishes school. But to that end, for parents like yourself that world schools their child, and that child has a desire to go on to college, university, how are you able to then, kind of document in a way, or are schools, universities, schools, institutions of higher education acceptive of world schooling as an entry point for children who want to seek that higher education opportunity?
Absolutely. I think it's important to note that, whatever path you might be pursuing for this educational journey as a family, there are going to be specific requirements depending on what it is your young person might like to do in the future. There might be, specific entrance exams or, other testing requirements, whatever those things might be in whatever part of the world. Those things are very clearly laid out, and you can, peruse the specific requirements for institutions of higher learning, or, speaking with individuals within a specific industry, if it's, a job or a career, something that they might want to pursue. But over the course of these last 5 years, that, we have been diving deeper and deeper into the wide world that is world schooling, I have gotten to know a number of professionals in higher education, including people who have been deans in admissions and other areas in institutions of higher learning. And the thing that I am hearing constantly from administrators, from educators in those institutions, it's that what the schools are really seeking, what the educators are looking for to fill out their student population, is young people who have not just a specific set of skills that they have learned in school, but an understanding of themselves, the way they learn, drive, personal drive, curiosity, and determination. And all of these are skills that we can continue to cultivate in our children wherever they are in the world, whether they're in a traditional or a homeschooling or unschooling or world schooling setting, whatever that might look like. And the methods for documentation, for demonstrating that, whether it's for an institution of higher learning or for a future profession, are growing more and more broad by the day. I know someone who was recently applying to university. This is a child who has never been in a public school, but who has been pursuing home education in the United States for their entire young life. And the documentation came in the form of video, along with lots of written work documenting a particular passion project that this young person has. And they went to the trouble of, taking SATs and doing whatever other requirements they had. But what was most rewarding was hearing that feedback from the admissions staff, from the other adults within the community who had written letters of recommendation, to see the creativity and the incredible amount of skill and logic and determination and all of these things that had gone into the method that this young person used to construct this completely unique and individual project that was a demonstration of who they are as an individual and what it is they're most passionate about and the contribution that that individual wants to make to the world. And that was demonstrated in such a beautiful, creative, articulate way. They were blown away.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
No need to think that just because this is the way things have been, that's the way they have to be in the future. As I said earlier, we all have seen that the world is changing in very drastic ways. And now, more than ever, is the perfect time for us to capitalize on that and to go forward in a way that makes the most sense for our children, for our families, and for, this future world that, we have no idea what that's going to look like.
We sure don't. But I feel like the people who, and I'm thinking of a friend in particular who made the decision to shut down her business well before the pandemic, maybe a year prior, and pull her kids out of traditional school. She lives in New Jersey and homeschool. And I was like, wow, now 2 of them, or maybe all 3 of them, have started businesses. And so she's able to leverage her skills as an entrepreneur and help them, like, okay, how do you write a business case? What do you think about a SWOT analysis and, your P&L? So you're able to take some of these concepts that just seem very nebulous and be able to bring it to life and apply it in such a way that you are introducing different concepts, but it's easier to do that when it doesn't seem so far off or, things are just kind of out of sorts, if you will. I'm looking at the comments again. Hey, Michelle's here from Afro Expats. Hey, Michelle. So important. Thank you for this. I'm at a crossroads on how my son will be taught for the upcoming year. This is just what I needed. Thank you for speaking about this, Krishan and Karen. You're welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Yes, I think, for many of us that, we're approaching the fall, and, for my daughter in particular, as I mentioned, she's a rising 11th grader, and her education has been a hot mess because the first, I think it was her sophomore. No, I don't even think her sophomore year was a pandemic. So her freshman year, she was only there maybe 2 or 3 months, and it made national news. The school district got hacked. So the school district got hacked. Parents couldn't access grades. Teachers couldn't put in things into the system. Their personal information had been compromised. There were all these systems that were, not accessible. Yeah. And so they were trying to manage through that, right? This and it was say that 10 times fast, a ransomware attack. Yeah. So it was all that cybersecurity, right? That whole chaos, right? You're a freshman, you're starting, you go into this whole thing, and then that whole chaos ensued. And then just as things calm down, going to the 10th grade, it's like, oh, let me just throw a little global pandemic on top of that.
A little extra. Just something on top of the interesting experience.
Yeah, and so then it's the whole remote learning. And, then they gave this option towards the end of the school year this year to do a hybrid. But my ex-husband and I were not in favor of that because we just knew, and that's how it played out, where kids go in one day, somebody tests positive, everybody's got to go home. And that just level of, chaos was just okay, not interested. So when she starts school in September, this is her first real opportunity to start high school because it's been so disjointed and chaotic for the first 2 years. And that's why I'm fingers crossed, let us get through these last 2 years, because I don't want that to be, I feel so bad that this has been, her experience.
But you're absolutely right. And your daughter's case is the perfect example of why this is so important for us as adults, not just the parents of these children who are being affected right in this moment, but to step back and look at all of humanity. I mean, we are still in the middle of this watershed moment in human history. This past year and a half and however long before, I don't think we're ever going back to normal in the sense that many of us might like to, but we are in a period of transition, and we cannot constantly try to recreate what happened before and say that we have to make it look like that again in the future, because the whole world has changed.
Yeah.
My experience in the past, as an educator, had been that, there are 12 years of, schooling and this compulsory education, and then the possibility of going into, 4+ years of higher learning. And that was sort of the educational path, the expectation, the norm, if you will. That 16 years, that was just like the bare minimum. That was the requirement. That was the minimum standard. And what we're looking at now is so much different even than the outside expectations that I had seen, like people who might have been homeschooled for part or all of those earlier 12 years prior to the latter 4, or someone who might be really out there in this, hippie liberal experience of taking a gap year. Ooh, that's just like really drastic and unheard of. And, one of those wild and marvelous adventurous spirits. But no, with the whole world having transitioned to, having to do this hybrid or virtual learning for some or all of the past year and a half, the world has opened up to the possibilities of learning looking a lot different than it has in the past. And what we decide to do over the next 6 months, over the next year or 2 years, might change again in another 3 to 5 years. Again, we don't know what the future is going to look like. And that's why it's all the more important that we stop trying to project our expectations, our demands on our children, and focus on who they are and where they are and what really moves the needle for them in this moment right now. Because when we support and encourage that, we continue to build up everything in them that they need to be the best possible versions of themselves, no matter what the future looks like.
Absolutely. Because I think with world schooling, homeschooling, I feel like there's an opportunity to infuse and introduce concepts that we as adults are either experienced or learning how to experience, that in the traditional sense are those that have grown up in the traditional learning environment hadn't had, right? So
Exactly.
I think about things like, breathing exercises, mindfulness exercises, meditation, yoga, journaling, all of these things that enable, us to, as adults, right, to take better, pay better attention to self-care, but also to start to learn how to be with ourselves, in our bodies, knowing what different sensations feel like when you're anxious and things like that. We throw, as adults, in a general sense, we throw a lot of expectations on our children and just expect that they'll be resilient, they'll adapt. But, it's only usually when they grow up that they're even, I guess, remotely comfortable saying like, that wasn't very helpful. Or, you learn a different thing. And that's the thing, like, wow, to be able to have this level of opportunity and to impart this developmental capacity for our children and boundless curiosity is something that I think is so powerful. And that's how you change lives. That's how you change society. It's so interesting in the States, and we're dealing with not only like the pandemic, but then, in its whole chaos, but also for parents that are transitioning and putting their child back in school, like myself, you have the children that are older, who, like my daughter, has been vaccinated, or you have the younger children who haven't been able to. And then, you have states and school districts clamoring and clashing, and all of this about wearing masks, not wearing masks, testing availability, not testing, and all of this stuff. And again, another layer that they have to contend with. And my thought was, as I listened to it, and I've had to kind of insulate myself to some degree from it, is, and I'm gonna go on my soapbox for a second.
Go ahead. Come on, preach.
All of this about wearing a mask, right? Oh, I gotta, be a governor, and I've got to mandate this, and I'm gonna take, vital money from school districts if they don't, do all this. And it's like, really? Because we also have a gun violence problem. We've also had to enable our children to think about their own personal safety. There's kids that have bulletproof backpacks and things like that, or go through, metal detectors to go into an educational environment. But we don't talk about that. We don't talk about school shootings. The reason why we didn't have school shootings last year was because everybody was home. Right? So how much can a human, especially a young human, how much, if we as adults are challenged with being inundated with stress and overwhelmed with the 24-hour news cycle and social media and all of these other things, if we're struggling as adults, how can we expect our kids to have that same level of, resilience and capacity, and when there's just so much going at once? There's so much.
It's a lot. And as adults, we know, we can feel it. We're all dealing with that so much. And in all of that so muchness, I feel like part of my role as not just as a parent, as an educator, as somebody in this position that I'm honored which you have put me, to share these experiences with other people, is really to step up and say, hey, you know what? There's another way. That's really what all of this is about. It's, to give people an example to look at and say, not to say that what we're doing is better or worse. It's different. It's something that we have been blessed to be able to customize to who we are and where we are in our educational and personal journey. And that is possible to some extent for everybody. Wherever they happen to be in the world, wherever they happen to be in their own educational journey. Now, I will caution you because, you're in the United States. I know a lot of your listeners are as well. And a lot of people who are preparing their Blaxit, might be looking at, well, how do I make that happen for me specifically? And you mentioned how there are so many different things happening, not just at the federal level, but within each state, and even more specifically within each smaller districts. Every state in the United States has its own rules, and world schooling falls under the homeschooling category. And every state has different laws and requirements and expectations when it comes to homeschooling. So the first thing I advise parents to do is to find out what the laws are in your state. And if they don't seem to necessarily be compatible with what you want to do, where you want to go, how you want to proceed in your educational journey as a family, that might be the time to take a look at possibly changing to another state. And that not necessarily as difficult or as challenging as it might sound. There are a number of different things that people can do to learn about and to follow all of the necessary rules and laws in their area. But once you have made the determination to do that, the joy and the beauty of the responsibility is that you really do get to take ownership of it. And then all of that other so muchness that you were talking about you can really let a lot of that fall to the wayside, because it doesn't have to be a part of your daily life if you don't want it to.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it really is. It's about, for those of you that are watching or watching the replay, it's all about information and giving you additional options, right, to consider in your consideration set. And so I would say that, if anything in this conversation or what you've researched about homeschooling, unschooling, world schooling is interesting or popped open that, little level of curiosity, definitely take it a step further. As Karen suggested, start with where you are now, also with the countries that you're considering. For those of you who are already abroad, if you have your child or your child is, smaller and getting close to that school age, this might be an option, to even try out and see if this is something that fits. But I think, for us, and just going back to what we had said earlier about being able to affect change, in my mind, this is how you start to magnify. And right now, right, it might seem like this is a small community, but there's also a ripple effect that can happen. So that's what I'm really excited about. So I know we're starting to wrap, and I want to give you, Karen, an opportunity to talk about Our Kitchen Classroom and something that you have coming up.
That's right. As I said when I introduced myself earlier, I am the head chef of Our Kitchen Classroom, and that is a business that really grew out of our transition from the brick and mortar school that we founded in Japan, where we cooked and prepared snacks every day with the children and families and the community in which we were living, and to spread out to the four corners of the globe. As we move around the world, we continue to learn a variety of things about language and history and cultures and geography as we meet all of these amazing new people and we travel to all these incredible places. And that's what I teach, these global dishes, these culinary techniques, so many of the different things that we're learning that are interconnected with all of those things. And because that's so much an integral part of how our nomadic world schooling journey really began, it's completely interwoven into all of the cooking and all of the stories that I share in the Ultimate Cooking with Children workshop. And that's what we're going to be starting next month, where, we work through a variety of different types of dishes, lots of different cooking techniques. We get to get our hands messy playing with different types of dough and food. And we play with it all in the most amazing multi-sensorial way. And throughout this process, which is good for children, for adults, for families together, we have a chance to continually question all of those things that you thought had to happen in a certain way, to expand the boundaries of what you feel comfortable doing as you continue to explore and learn and master new skills. And so I'm really excited to be able to offer all of the people who are watching this conversation today to sign up for our Ultimate Cooking with Children workshop. And you can find lots more details as well as the link to register on my website at ourkitchenclassroom.com. And if you sign up before we get through the month of August here, there is a 25% discount off of the standard tuition.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. And I'll be sure to add that to the description in the comments of this video so that people can have it here as well, so they can take action. And it's interesting, as I was listening to you talk and even just thinking of some of the questions that we had addressed earlier, what I love about what you do in Our Kitchen Classroom, there's a whole lot there, right? There's community, being able to cook, and then introducing those concepts that you can apply, right? Measuring, math, chemistry, science, right? Putting a little bit of this, a little bit of that, adding heat, all of those things like can come together in one fun lesson, right? But then you're able to see and taste, right? Like, oh, if I do this, or if I add a little bit of that, or if I cut back on this, or if I heat it up to here, or if I cool down, like what are the different effects that happen? That's what I think is so powerful about, the platform that you've created with Our Kitchen Classroom. And for those people that, like I said, are live or watching the replay, please, like this is a great opportunity that if you're curious about world schooling, like you want to see it in action, I think that's a great opportunity to see, like, how do you take something that is seemingly as simple as cooking a meal or cooking or baking and turning it into an actual lesson that introduces concepts, right? You don't have to say, oh, well, I know you're 6 and you haven't quite gotten the fractions yet, right? You're able to say, hey, take this and turn it into a lesson in real time that then just reinforces that in their mind. So I'm just so glad that the universe connected us, because
so am I.
a fantastic conversation, and I have to have you on the podcast, so we can have a conversation, no technical glitches, no nothing, just us, no hurricanes amiss, So,
God willing, no.
right? So I am just absolutely, absolutely delighted to have you here. And so delighted for those of you who have joined. And like I said, for those of you who are going to watch the replay. Karen, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to share your wisdom and experience as a nomad, as a world schooling parent. This has just been fabulous.
Thank you. It has been an honor and a privilege. I'm had a great time fielding questions from those people who got to join us live and sharing some of the wonderful little snippets from our world schooling journey so far. And I can't wait for us to hop on again and talk some more, where we can get into, even more deeper details about the world travel and the languages, and we can talk food and, all that other good stuff that I know we were hoping to get into today. We just didn't have enough time.
I know, because I know it's getting late on your end, so I'm being sensitive to that as well. But yes, I love a part 2. So this is fantastic. Thank you so much. And again, thank you for everyone that joined. Take care. Bye for now.